Darkness. That is all. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the poetry discussion playlist, now approaching 600 poems strong. Number two being the Horror Fest 2024 playlist, 31 horror-inspired videos in 31 days on the channel. Today's poem is Darkness by Lord Byron, and it reads as such. I had a dream which was not all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars did wander darkling in the eternal space, rayless and pathless, and the icy earth swung blind and blackening in the moonless air. Morn came and went and came and brought no day, and men forgot their passions in the dread of their desolation, and all hearts were chilled into a selfish prayer for light. And they did live by watchfires and the thrones, the palaces of crowned kings, the huts, the habitations of all things which dwell, were burnt for beacons, cities were consumed, and men were gathered round their blazing homes to look once more into each other's face. Happy were those who dwelt within the eye of the volcanoes, and their mountain torch, a fearful hope was all the world contained. Forests were set on fire, but hour by hour they fell and faded, and the crackling trunks extinguished with a crash, and all was black. The brows of men by the despairing light wore an unearthly aspect. As by fits the flashes fell upon them. Some lay down and hid their eyes and wept, and some did rest their chins upon their clenched hands and smiled. And others hurried to and fro and fed their funeral piles with fuel, and looked up with mad disquietude on the dull sky, the pall of the past world, and then again with curses cast them down upon the dust, and gnashed their teeth, and howled, and wild birds shrieked, and terrified did flutter on the ground, and flap their useless wings. The wildest brutes came tame and tremulous, and vipers crawled and twinned themselves among the multitude, hissing but stingless. They were slain for food, and war, which for a moment was no more, did glut himself again. A meal was bought with blood, and each sate sullenly apart, gorging himself in gloom. No love was left. All earth was but one thought, and that was death. Immediate and inglorious, and the pang of famine fed upon all entrails. Men died, and their bones were tombless as their flesh. The meager by the meager were devoured. Even dogs assailed their masters, all save one, and he was faithful to a corpse, and kept the birds and beasts and famished men at bay, till hunger clung them, or the dropping dead lured their lank jaws. Himself sought out no food, but with a piteous and perpetual moan, and a quick, desolate cry, licking the hand which answered not with a caress, he died. The crowd was famished by degrees, but two of an enormous city did survive, and they were enemies. They met beside the dying embers of an altar place, where had been heaped a mass of holy things for an unholy usage. They raked up and shivering scraped with their cold skeleton hands the feeble ashes, and the feeble breath blew for a little life and made a flame which was a mockery. And then they lifted up their eyes as it grew lighter, and beheld each other's aspects, saw and shrieked and died. Even of their mutual hideousness they died, unknowing who he was upon whose brow famine had written fiend. The world was void, the populous and the powerful was a lump, seasonless, herbless, treeless, manless, lifeless, a lump of death. A chaos of hard clay. The rivers, lakes, and oceans all stood still, and nothing stirred within their silent depths. Ships sailorless lay rotting on the sea, and their masts fell down piecemeal as they dropped. They slept on the abyss without a surge. The waves were dead, and the tides were in their grave. The moon, their mistress, had expired before. The winds were withered in the stagnant air, and the clouds perished. Darkness had no need of aid from them. She was the universe. So, this is an apocalypse or an apocalypse adjacent poem, right? We don't really know that this is the end of the end, but we know that this is sort of the term post-apocalyptic, as we have in pop culture today, is a bit of a bastardization of the term apocalypse in general, of the idea of the apocalypse in general. In fact, the the term post-apocalyptic really sort of makes it seem as if in most of these stories are written sort of extra religiously, like outside of religiously. You think of The Road, which this poem very much would remind you of if you read the two in tandem. That is not a religious text, not per se, not particularly. I think that there are certainly allusions in it, but the novel suggests, if we are to call it post-apocalyptic, that the apocalypse happened, the reclaiming of those spirits who would be with their God, right? That happens, and then the rest of the people just have to keep on living. This is sort of one of those types of stories. And it's very intoxicating, I think. These ideas of the apocalypse, these ideas of civilizations falling. But why is that so captivating? Are we obsessed? So, are we obsessed with paranoia, the paranoia of our own weakness? Are we obsessed with the idea that we will die? And so there's a quote from Christopher Hitchens where he was talking at like a bookstore. It was a very small event, and he said, "Am I bothered by the fact that someday I will die? Not particularly. For however many years before I was born, I didn't exist. For however many years after I'm dead, I won't exist. But it does bother me that you will go on living." Right? Sort of this combative idea that, no, death doesn't bother me. The idea of death doesn't bother me, but you still being here sure does. That is sort of I would say maybe the ethos behind this type of literature, because everything in literature is kind of a scope, right? Or is kind of a scope, I think may be the best metaphor. Everything in literature is a way to look at something. So these post-apocalyptic stories, are these just a way of examining our own coping with the fact that we will die? One thing that I have said time and again, 1,000 times on this channel: good literature often happens when you use the big through the little or the little through the big. What do I mean by that? You want to talk about a big idea like greed. You don't talk about the greed idea. You give us a person, make him greedy, and tell us what those compulsions do to him, right? He's greedy, so maybe he steals his neighbor's lawn chair that's sitting on the lawn. Well, now he has a lawn chair that he can't use because if his neighbor sees him sitting in it, then he's just got it. Well, then we go inside his house and we understand that his house is full of things that he's stolen from his neighbors that he can never use. Now he doesn't have any way to move inside his own home. Now you have told the story of greed and how that type of greed makes you immobile in your own life. Okay, so that's a big idea through a little story. You can also tell a little idea through a big story. I'm afraid of dying. Let me tell that story through volcanoes going off and the whole world has ended. Well, at that point, what does anyone have to live for? I'm gone. Why do they still want to be around? Right? You tell this idea of the very little thing that bothers you when you're asleep and you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning on Tuesdays, because Tuesdays you always have that fondue, and that fondue makes you get up in the middle of the night, whatever it is, right? You tell that very little insecurity through a very big idea. That is what I think we have in this story. That's all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. There's poetry on the channel every Monday, so if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button. Stick around for more, and as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.